I wrote the book Antoine Frédéric Ozanam because there had been much written about Ozanam in French. Gérard Chauvy, probably one of the best and most recent. However, most of those books have not been translated into English or into other languages, and probably won't be for some time. Being a member of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, as well as a historian that's interested in French history, I decided that it was probably time to have a biography of Ozanam. There hadn't been a comprehensive biography of Ozanam in English since the late 1800s. And so I decided to try to do that comprehensive biography and to fill that particular niche. Antoine Frédéric Ozanam is often referred to as the principal founder of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. The Society of St. Vincent de Paul was founded in April of 1833, actually on his 20th birthday. He and 6 people whom he knew, most of them young students, and one man who served as a kind of a mentor to them, Emmanuel Bailly, who was about 40 years of age, met to not only talk about charity, but to do charity. In other words, what they thought was absolutely necessary was for them to go out and actively do works of charity, and then to come back and think about, talk about, and understand what they were doing and the kind of impact they were making. From that humble beginning in 1833, by the time of his death in 1853 at the young age of 40, the Society of St. Vincent de Paul was already in 15 countries worldwide. It is now in over 150 countries worldwide. Ozanam also wanted to have a lay organization. So the place of priests in the organization was the place of spiritual advisor. That was their place. They were not to be president. They were not to be officers. They were not to run it. And one of the reasons why Ozanam felt that way, he felt that people would respond better to lay people, given all of the things that happened, the criticisms of the church during the French Revolution and the immediate aftermath of that. They would respond better to lay people, and lay people could actually cause them again to trust the church. When I wrote this biography, I decided on 3 different parts. I wanted to do the biography in a different way than just a strict chronological biography. The first part deals with his life, but again, I didn't do it in a strict chronological fashion. I decided to look at Ozanam through the lens of different roles. We all play different roles in our life. And so I looked at him as a son and a sibling. I looked at him as a student. I looked at him as a spouse. I looked at him as someone who advocated for the people, spokesperson for the people. And that gave, I think, a richer and deeper dimension to his life. Then I looked at Ozanam in terms of how he responded to different important topics. Topics not only important for his day and age, but also important for us. Friendship. He was a dear friend, and what friendship meant to him. Catholic social thought, solidarity. How would he respond to Catholic social thought today? He was oftentimes looked upon or thought to be a precursor of Catholic social thought. Well, how would he respond? Let's look at his ideas and see how he would respond to Catholic social thought. Systemic change, a variety of things that we looked at. I think one of the most interesting parts of those lessons was a lesson in suffering, because he suffered terribly in the latter years of his life, dying at a very young age. And how he dealt with suffering is extremely interesting, and I devoted an entire chapter to that. And so the lessons are lessons he learned, but lessons he also can convey to us. The third and last part, I decided to look at his legacy. A number of people had talked about his legacy, but I didn't think anyone had gone in depth into what he actually has left us. And I looked at 4 areas. I looked at the area of professional legacy, a legacy that we would call a public legacy, a legacy of practice, how you do things, and then a personal legacy, a life well lived, a good Christian life as a good Christian person, a good Christian husband, a good Christian father. And so that particular chapter, I think, in itself is a major contribution. I think the hardest part of researching this book was to look at what people thought of Ozanam, even what some people attributed to Ozanam in terms of words and expressions and thoughts, and to really determine whether or not those were accurate. In a number of cases, I found no evidence for some of the things people attributed to him. In other instances, I not only found evidence, I found that there was even more to flesh out, much deeper. Of course, one of the big problems here also is that some of Ozanam's works are translated into English, but most of his letters are not. And I was able, with the help of the International Society of St. Vincent de Paul, to actually get copies of all of his letters. And those letters were fortunately not in handwriting any longer, so it was a little easier to deal with. And so I was able to deal with all of his letters, his correspondence, voluminous, about 6 volumes of letters, just voluminous. I own every work that he wrote. I own all of his letters. I own also the entire case that was brought up for his beatification. I have all the documents of that. So I own pretty much everything that Frédéric Ozanam wrote or that's written about Frédéric Ozanam. For many people, including people in the Society of St. Vincent de Paul today, they oftentimes think of charity or justice. What's interesting is the Catholic Church today, Pope Benedict in fact wrote on this, really linked the two intimately. And what's also interesting is that Ozanam did that back in the 19th century. For Ozanam, it was extremely important to do charity, to extend oneself to others and to meet the needs that one saw. However, he also thought that if you cared enough about other people, you needed to ask, why was there a need for charity? And that moves you into the issue of justice. And so he saw that the two were intimately linked, each of them balancing the other. And they were both absolutely necessary. It was not an issue of one or the other. I'll give you an example. One of the first home visits he made, visiting a particular person, a woman. Her husband drank to excess. She had several children. She was beside herself. What he did was, he didn't just help her in terms of bringing food. He explored more deeply. He listened to her carefully, and he was able to get a legal decision that proved that they were not legally married, which meant that the woman was free to leave the husband. Talking with the woman, he got a legal action against the husband to force him to stay in Paris, which meant he couldn't leave Paris. Therefore, she and her children could leave Paris to go with her family and not worry about any retribution. I bring up that point because it wasn't just the immediate need that was met there. He talked to the person, he worked with the person, and he actually advocated for the person. And so that home visit actually shows the connection of both charity and justice together. Now, one of the things that is important to understand about the society is that what Ozanam did in the home visit that I just described was unusual for men. Most of the time, if men did charity, someone came to their home, asked them for help, and they might give some help. The idea of men going out into the streets, visiting the homes of people and working with them directly, that was actually thought to be women's work. And in fact, it's interesting. The 7 young men that formed this first conference actually worked with the Daughters of Charity. They thought of themselves as auxiliaries of the Daughters of Charity. And so it was actually countercultural. It was actually very revolutionary to have a group of young men going out and doing charitable work. Later on, in the late 60s, when times had changed, that is when the society re-looked at itself and said, it is time to ask women back into the society, because now we're no longer countercultural if we don't do that. And so now we have a significant number of women, including currently the national president who's just about finishing her term is a woman. As far as the cover is concerned, it's really unique, I think, unusual in a lot of ways. The painter who painted it was inspired by Marc Chagall, the painter Marc Chagall. I came across this painting when I was doing some research on various pictures. I had been taking pictures myself. I had gone to Paris several times. I had been looking for possible portraits of Ozanam, and I came across this particular case. It was in Graz, Austria, in a church named St. Vincent. It was painted by a member of the Congregation of the Mission, which is the Congregation of the Mission is the priests, group of priests founded by St. Vincent de Paul. The priest was a priest named Sickinger, and he had a real fascination with Ozanam, and he had painted this incredible mural of Ozanam standing at the podium. In fact, the podium has on it the motto of the Sorbonne at which Ozanam taught. It shows Christ in the background, Notre Dame in the background, the French flag, and though he's at the podium teaching, his hand is reaching out to those in need that are sitting in the audience at the table. So it's just a very powerful image. I corresponded with Sickinger. He was thrilled to let me use it. Now, normally you have to pay a good deal of money, but because I was a leader in the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, he gave me free use to use this whatever way I wanted to. He just died about 2 years ago at the age of 90. And his other paintings are just as spectacular as this particular portrait. But I knew this cover would really grab people's attention. There are really multiple audiences. One of the reasons we have numerous footnotes is because one audience is a scholarly audience. As I mentioned before, there had been no comprehensive scholarly biography of Ozanam in many, many years. But we also chose to take all of those footnotes and put them at the end of the book, which would therefore not in any way discourage an average reader, because we knew that there would be many, many in the St. Vincent de Paul Society and in the Vincentian community worldwide, the Daughters of Charity, the Congregation of the Mission, the Ladies of Charity. There would be many of those who might want to read this as well. And the third group would be just those not in the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, not scholars, but who are just interested in people who have made what I think are groundbreaking contributions, or who are interested in religious history. So it has something for all those three people. What I'd like people to come away with is to really see this man not as a cookie cutter figure, but rather as a genuine, real human being with great strengths and great faults, overcame those faults, who really focused on his strengths, who was willing to look at himself, and a person who in difficult times was willing not to look the other way, but rather to become involved. It's a great lesson for anyone, whether it be a scholar or whether it be a general reader.